Good evening and welcome to this session. We call these sessions the IPSC Solidarity Sessions on Palestine. So this is our session, our series for 2025. We have 5 different sessions as we had last year on Monday nights from 7 to 8. Tonight we have Eman Mohammed presenting. Eman is a photojournalist and a senior TED Fellow whose work documents the resilience and resistance of the people of Palestine. Eman lives in Dublin at the moment, but she's a refugee from Ramla. She was raised in Gaza, and she began her photography as an active witness under siege. Her work centers women's and children's experiences during the Zionist regime's ongoing ethnic cleansing campaign. Her work confronts colonial narratives through stories of endurance and defiance. Eman is an award-winning journalist, and her projects have been exhibited internationally, and used as evidence before the International Criminal Court. And her work has been published by major outlets, including the New York Times, The Guardian, The Washington Post, and CNN. So I'll introduce Eman in a few minutes. I just want to briefly say that we started last week with a session on the central bank, which was very well attended. We're having a session next week with Dr. John Reynolds of Maynooth. John is an international, an expert on international law on Palestine and has supported cases in the ICC and ICJ. On Monday 24th, we will have Dr. Rebecca Heslin, a clinical psychologist, and she's going to be presenting on solidarity as praxis, psychology, power, and the struggle for Palestine. And on the final evening, we'll have Zoe Lawler, our chair, and Brian O'Hagerty, our media officer, who will present on the campaigns that we're focusing on in Ireland, including the BDS, the Occupied Territories Bill, Shannon, etc. And we'll focus on that. So I also want to introduce Brian O'Hagerty. Brian, you can see him on the screen there.
Very good.
And Brian will be assisting with the Zoom webinar and also with the Q&A. The webinar will be for about an hour. Sometimes runs a little bit over because people are asking questions, so that's good. So we'll have Q&A at the end. The session is being recorded, but attendee details are not shown on screen. And so you will see 3 buttons on the bottom of your screen. The only one that really is of engagement use is the Q&A button. So you can ask questions and we will either answer those questions verbally or by text. And at the end of the session, if you still have questions, you can email them to education@ipsc.ie. So with that, I want to hand over to Eman. And we're delighted to have you, Eman, this evening. And we're really looking forward to your presentation. And I'm just going to hand over to you now. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Tom. I really appreciate the introduction, and I appreciate everyone who's joining on busy Monday evening. That's going to be hopefully a fun night knowing more about Gaza, but also I'm ready for any questions that you have. I'm going to walk you right now through some of the images and explain the backstage of many of these stories and how they made it into the news. But before I do, I'm just gonna, Tom, can you see the slideshow fine?
Yes.
Okay, perfectly. I'm just gonna start with saying that I'm a Palestinian photojournalist from Gaza. I started my career in Gaza and I lived there till I was 27. Till I unfortunately had to evacuate because my daughter got injured. But through my life in Gaza, I really never thought that I would leave. I thought that this is the place to be, and it just everything within the Palestinian community in Gaza just captivated me in a way that I felt it was so important to tell these stories, but it was also very important for me to learn about my own community and in a search somewhat to what really made our life in Gaza possible, even during all the invasions by the Israeli occupation, even with all the wars that had been launched on Gaza throughout the years. So I always start with a photo of the beach, because Gaza is a beach city, and I can't tell you how many times I've been asked if the weather there is a desert weather, if it's too hot and all of that. So it's a beach city, and the weather cannot be more perfect. I'm not teasing. I love the Irish weather. However, it is different. Everyone in Gaza is so attached to the beach. It's literally a lifeline for many of us. And so you're going to see a lot of the photos being taken on the beach, a lot of the events taking place on the beach as well. Growing up in Gaza, I lived next to the International Red Cross office in Gaza. So every Monday morning, I would wake up for listening to the mothers, the Palestinian mothers of Palestinian hostages who had been held in Israeli prisons. Many, and the majority, were held without trial, without even being charged. So they had no access to lawyers and no access to due process. In other terms, they were hostages, and they were held by the occupation for indefinite period of time. So their mothers came every Monday to the International Red Cross office to ask to have any kind of information about their sons and sometimes grandchildren, nephews, nieces. And they held some sort of a visual that was a morning visual to not only demand their release, but get the press to cover their stories individually. And that right off the bat boggled my mind, because I literally grew up with this event taking place every Monday from the time I was a child, 2, 3 year old, that I can remember, till I was 19. I started my career in photojournalism. That's a very long period of time to brush a story and push it under the rug. And that was actually very successful, because people got used to seeing stories or some headlines here and there, but never understood fully what is happening with the Palestinians, what is happening with Palestine. I bet you've never heard the term Palestinian hostage before there was Israeli hostages. So this was a big, it wasn't a turning point, but it was a constant story in the back of my head, that I felt it was being, the world was being exposed to the information. It wasn't lack of information that they were having, but it was lack of interest. And so much of what I ended up covering were not just the photos, but the stories behind the photos, the stories that many of made this photo come to life. As you see in this photo here, there are 8 children just looking through their window while having their laundry hanging on the window. And this photo I actually took as a coincidence during a funeral. So there was a funeral passing, and I was chasing the funeral, as many of us do, because the funerals take off very quickly in Gaza. And I just noticed that there were 8 faces, tiny faces, looking at me through this window. And it wasn't to say which is more important. It wasn't to say that the funeral was not important, but I was trying to compete with wire agencies, with at that point full-on male dominated field, and all my colleagues were men who were already equipped with contracts with agencies like AP, Reuters, AFP, and so on. And I was looking for a way that I can translate what I want to tell through the photos, through the stories. We've been told again and again as young journalists back then that we should not influence the story in any shape or form. And while I understand that, it seemed like it would be wrong to not have intentions, to not be invested in the story. So in this one, I took the photo first. I took the photo, and it looked so colorful and so beautiful, and it needed to mean more. And sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's just a beautiful frame with very simple story. but I felt like there was more to it. So I went up to the building where I saw these children were looking through the window, and I knocked on the door. I spoke to the mom, and I found out that they were all children of a man that was killed in the fighting between Hamas and Fatah in 2006 and 2007, actually, towards the end of 2007, when Hamas won the election and Fatah would not relinquish the control of the authority, which is known as PA, but highly concentrated by Fatah members only. And their father was caught in between the fire and got killed. And so it opened the door for me to do a totally different story that I didn't know people can see it visually, because the fighting between Fatah and Hamas was horrific. However, there was always someone on Western media saying that it's too complicated, and it was not, honestly. It was something that we lived with, but eventually just exploded. And this photo, this specific frame, enabled me to pursue this as a photo story to bring the people the information that they needed. There is some sort of magic to seeing and learning the details of the events through your ability to see them, to sense them, to walk through them. And that's not always an easy thing to do. The story of Palestinian fishermen and the fact that fishing was a craft that a lot of households uh, dependent on it for their livelihood. And despite having a beautiful beach that we had accessible, it was only accessible for, according to the Israeli occupation, 3 miles. And in reality, it was only 1 mile. So after 1 mile, the Palestinian fishermen would have the Israeli Navy ships starting to shoot at them, even though they had all the way to 3 miles. That was never possible. And so there was another story that I didn't know how to translate it into visuals without being there with the fishermen, which was a risk that they wouldn't have took on them, just because of the look of the tele lenses and the cameras that Palestinian journalists, and I'm sure as you saw for over the past 2 years, how Palestinian journalists become a target, and the Palestinian society is very aware of that. In the process of documenting these bits and pieces of Gaza, I've often found the stories literally under my nose. And it was from the very beginning of the what is a routine in Gaza? What is a daily life in Gaza? How does that look like? The fact that Palestinians did not have access to clean water or constant power like electricity was a story that was not just overlooked but undercovered as well. So we survived throughout the week by having a schedule for who's going to have electricity today. Literally goes from one street, one neighborhood to another. And throughout that, each neighborhood, each block of apartments gets closer to 4 hours of electricity per day. Now, that can happen at 1 a.m., that can happen at 3 a.m., that can happen at 8 a.m., maybe late at night. There was no consistency, which made life really unbearable for a lot of people whose work depended on the electricity. For others who were just not enjoying life to the fullest. I don't remember the last time I let my phone go to like 50% or 20% battery, because it just doesn't happen. When you're in Gaza, you're always on survival mode. You always need access to electricity, emergency, like a way to maintain your access to the world. So when the genocide happened, I'm sure you've heard a lot of people saying that they don't understand how Palestinians don't have access to food or have access or a home, and they are intense. However, they were able to access the internet, and you could see them on social media and so on and so forth. And that actually made perfect sense for me, because the way that our life had been dictated by the occupation made us plugged to the outside world 24/7. We needed to know all the news, we needed to know all the information, and we also needed to know the news and the information about other struggles. So we knew a lot about the fight, the Irish fight for liberation, and we were definitely plugged to communist movements around the world for liberation, and so on and so forth. In that sense, it made us very well informed, but also continuously talking about our cause and feeling like it's falling on deaf ears. The story that was not ever going to be old story, or a story that Western media was not interested in, was the Al-Qassam. Al-Qassam is the militant brigade to Hamas. So in a way, Hamas started as a political movement, and then it became it created its own militant group known as Al-Qassam, which you see them here in the photo. A lot of other movements, for an example, the IRA started as a resistance and then became a political movement. In Gaza, it was the opposite. And the way that it was created was something that the world was not really interested in. However, they were always interested in seeing Qassam training and how they convene and how they appear because of their militant look. This was one of the first trainings that I documented for Al-Qassam, and I was the only woman there, but I wasn't. I was the only woman photojournalist there, but I wasn't the only woman journalist there. But it was kind of a new experience for me and them, because I see them in press conferences, I see them on the street, I see them here and there. It wasn't groundbreaking for Palestinians to walk and see Al-Qassam militant walking down the street. But it was the first time that I was able to approach them that closely and have a lengthy period of time to ask questions. And from this photo, obviously you can see it's really a photo op. Everyone is just showing the guns they have, the poses they have during the training. However, what really shook me to the core is that every individual in this photo is less than 22 and lost one or both of their parents during an Israeli invasion. So every member that was in my frame, within my frame, was an orphan by the Israeli occupation in one year or another, in an invasion, in a war, in an airstrike, in an assassination for a Palestinian figure who also brought down 3 or 4 apartment buildings. So the way that their parents were taken away from them was very violent and was very memorable, that each member of them took the time to talk about it in a way that I did not expect a Qassam militant would show vulnerability in. And it's really shocked me when I saw the frame and was able to point that fact out. Now, my editors were very interested in all the other shots and showing a close-up on a militant face and the eyes and all of that, but almost nobody was interested in this story. And this happened in 2011, I believe. Don't quote me on it, I will verify the date, but it was very, very long time ago. Back to the beach. So every once in a while, a massacre would happen at the beach, and it would happen typically at the beginning of the summer. So at the time where everyone is gearing up to go back to the beach and enjoy lengthy time off on the beach in tents or in small cottages. However, that it would be, so we had Huda Ghalia massacre, which was targeting a family that was grilling corn on a cob at the beach, and then every member of that family got killed. For whatever reason, there was a child that wasn't with her family in the moment that they were struck, and her name was Huda Ghalia. She was 9 years old. And I'm sure some of you remember the footage because it was documented on video. The cameraman was the first on the scene, even before the paramedics, even before anyone else. And you can see them. They were very, very graphic footage of her inspecting each and every dead body of her family and trying to get them to talk to her or come back to life. However, even with that, and then we had the children of Bakr family who were playing football on the beach, and there was a foreign press agency with their staff there, and they were able to document the entire thing in photos. And it was 3 children who were playing soccer, and then the Israeli Navy hit them directly and killed the 3 of them. So it was not just a matter of documenting the beach life, but it's also the numbers of Palestinians that we had 2.4 million living in Gaza, and you had half of these at the beach every summer. And so people saw it as an attempt to stay in their the one place where they can get away, the one place where they can feel a little bit of zen with blood and pain. And it never honestly succeeded. Even during the genocide, I'm sure you've seen a lot of footage of people at the beach, and even some of them were criticized for having playing or smiling or feeling any kind of happiness. This photo looks all too familiar because it was in Izbit Abd Rabbo in 2008. So this was the very first war I documented, and we witnessed wars in 2008, 2009, 2012, and 2014, and 2021 before the genocide. So all of these wars, with the exception of one, had been documented nearly the same way. And in every time you can see that the Israeli army walks into Gaza with their tanks, with their soldiers on foot. They call it a military operation, and they invade and flatten entire neighborhoods. The difference that we're seeing now in Gaza, obviously, is that all of Gaza had been flattened the same way. This was one of the stories that I stumbled across, really. So when you see footage like this, it might feel overwhelming. It's twice, maybe 3 times more overwhelming to the photographer taking the photo, because we don't even know where to begin. Like, you're witnessing a catastrophe happening in real time, but the continuation of it, the aftermath, it happens to you and it happens in front of you. And that's the downside of being a local photojournalist, a Palestinian photojournalist, documenting our own, the assault on our own people, and then the daily life and the aftermath, because it really impacts you in so many ways. And in this moment, when your life is changing, you also have to document the change of other people's lives. And I think that's something that Palestinian journalists get thrown to the fire. No preparation, no way to make you understand the gravity of how your career is going to change the moment you start documenting. And I know it might sound like we live in Palestine, we live in Gaza, we are very familiar with this kind of aggression continuously happening to us, but it doesn't. As much as you feel shocked, as much as you feel like a heartache, we do too. And it does not become normal. At no point does it become normal. Now, there are things that you're going to see now through this photo, for an example, that had been normalized. So I stumbled across Mohammed Khader, the man on the left here. You can see him, he's feeding his pigeons. And it was just such a serene moment. Amidst all of that destruction, there was Muhammad, and he was feeding the pigeons like they were his pets. And he was just so soaked in the moment. He didn't even notice me. So I went on one knee, I started taking shots, and it wasn't until he like raised his eyesight and we exchanged greeting, and I said Assalamu alaikum. And he was just such a comfortable man to be around. He's just a a very wise, very soft-spoken, and very calm in every way that he's explaining his tragedy. And while I stumbled across his story just in a coincident kind of circumstances, I ended up spending 3 years documenting Muhammad and his family. So these are his nephews, and he worked in construction for 20 years. He had 7 daughters, beautiful little kids, and him and his wife Ibtisam. And when he came back to Azbit Abid Rabbo, this is the neighborhood where he lived, he was shocked to find his house surrounded by dynamite and blown into pieces. I think what the details of his story is what drawn me so much into continuing documenting it. Here, I want to show you this photo before I shot this frame. So as you can see, like I want you to be able to see what happens behind the scenes in a way. Here, he was just bringing so much joy to his nephews and to his daughters by putting this jacuzzi that it was the only thing that survived in his house. The one piece that was left without a scratch was the jacuzzi, and he brought it to the top of the rubble, and he put it, and he started having a bubble bath party, is what they called it back then, for the kids to just amidst all that destruction, so they would have a moment of peace. And this continued to be a tradition of the family. So this was like one of the first months that I started documenting with him. And him and his family seeked refuge, not in a tent at the beginning. They went under the rubble. So the rubble broke as in like in a shape of a tent almost. And as you can see in the first photo, and then they just decided that they want to live under the rubble till it was removed. The pigeons were a big part of the story, which I did not expect, but he literally treated his pigeons like they were pets. And it wasn't kind of ownership of pets where like he needs to keep them by his side. Wherever he would go, they would follow. And whenever he would bring food to his kids, he would bring food to the pigeons. So it was the dynamics of a relationship that I've never seen anything like it. Everything about him and his family, as you can see here, the way the house was destroyed in a way of like almost a tent. This was dangerous. It was a hazard to live underneath it, but nobody could convince Muhammad to leave the rubble till the authorities came and remove it. So this was during Ramadan. It was an iftar for the family. It was so rewarding seeing him and learning from him, and it affected my career tremendously because it was one of the first in-depth reportage that I was able to do during the aftermath. So this was not active what they call war zone, but it still was. The war did stop, but his suffering and his family's suffering did not stop. And it just continued to amaze me every single time that I would go for a visit. Obviously, that when you work on a long-term project, you don't go every single day. You give them breathers to just have you as an enjoyable guest, not a headache. And in this photo, as you can see, it's the same jacuzzi, and they are still within the similar circumstances of living. But this photo was taken in 2014, and the first photo you saw was taken in 2009. It just to give you an idea of how much time can pass and still very little can change for the quality of life in Gaza. So people ask at times about rebuilding and construction. And it became known that the Israeli occupation bans most of the construction materials to go through Gaza, to enter Gaza. And that's part of the ongoing siege. And this ongoing siege started in 2005. In 2006, it was called temporary siege, and it became permanent siege in 2007. And their excuse was that Hamas took control over Gaza, so They are not able to allow things like insulin pens, soccer balls, crayons, wedding gowns, a lot of medical supplies and construction materials into Gaza. So it was just like really a time that they decided that this siege is going to be full-blown siege on Gaza, and they are going to see if the world notices or not. And of course, no one noticed, because it wasn't till later on that people understood the gravity of the siege and its effects. So when you don't have concrete coming in, rebuilding is impossible. What you see here is Muhammad pulling the steel from his destroyed house. So this photo was probably 2 years later than the beginning of the project, the first time. And everyone lost hope of any attempts to rebuilding. They hoped that international organizations would help. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. 2 years later, they were still in the tents, as you can see. And so Palestinians started pulling the concrete and smashing it again. Their destroyed houses, pulling it again and destroying the bits and pieces that they can find again, so they can make like materials that they can work with, which doesn't make it very safe, but it was the only way to do it. This was the one shot I had when the authorities decided to remove the rubble. And what was really devastating about that moment, I don't even like this photo much, to be honest, and I wouldn't have included it unless it's part of the project, is that how heart breaking it was for Muhammad and his family to see their house getting destroyed again. Even though it was destroyed, it was really turned into rubble. But the moment that it was declared as a hazard and impossible to exist beneath it and have it as a shelter for them was so devastating for a man that is so soft spoken, so calm. I've never seen him lose it as much as he did that day. Not even when he found his house completely destroyed. Like when I stepped a foot into Azbit Abd Rabbu, that's literally when Muhammad was coming into his house and realizing that it was destroyed, and it was not anywhere near the intensity. Just to go to describe the pain and suffering that people live through during the aftermath. And now we're seeing Gaza having really a sham of a ceasefire, a joke of a ceasefire that it gets violated by Israel every 2 days. But at the same time, I keep thinking about all these stories of the aftermath that we're not seeing. Obviously, that project inspired me to tell more and more stories about the aftermath. And in this photo, you can see Abu Halima family. Abu Halima family lived even further in the north than Azbit Abd Rabbu. So they were closer to areas you might heard of called Beit Lahia or Beit Hanun. And the family suffered the unthinkable during 2009 when a white phosphor bomb landed on their house. You can see in this photo, this is a photo of the entire family. Only 3 members of this photo survived. And so here, the grandmother, Muhammad, points to the place where the bomb landed, and the catastrophe was that the whole family were taking shelter in that one room where the bomb hit. You can see here, it's all. I've never understood what white phosphor is beyond the photos that we took from the rooftop of buildings till I saw Abu Halima family, and the devastation that it left, not only like on the people, of course, the people were, it was detrimental, but also on the place, how much white phosphor can burn through and continue to burn through. What an evil weapon it is, truly, when people rush to put water on it, not knowing that it's white phosphor. It ignites even more and it continues to burn. So in that moment, in this spot specifically, almost 6 members of the family melted to death. And the testimonies that I heard from the grandmother, who, as you can see, also was badly injured, and one of the surviving grandchildren, this is Marah, she was 2 years old in this photo. It was just something I will never ever forget. The way that she talked about her daughter-in-law, about her son, about I think her 1-year-old baby herself. She had a baby as well, which is not uncommon in the structure of Palestinian families, and how they all just melted, like literally in front of her eyes, and the injuries that they sustained were extremely painful for them to live with. They continued to live in this state for almost 2 years, I believe. After the story was published, luckily, someone from the US back then coordinated for the grandmother and the grandchild here, Marah in the photo, to be transferred to the US for treatment. And that's one of the very, very few times that I can take pride in knowing that this exposure, this painful exposure that this family had to go through to tell their stories, resulted in something positive. Here, as you can see, the Israeli occupation in another apartment for the same family, they invaded and left them a heinous message, just pretty much letting them know that they will be back and they will kill them all next time. So these stories are not just aftermath. As you can see, a lot of the pain that these families endure is active and happening in real time. And it has a lot of influence when it reaches the public and when people learn the details and the names and see the faces behind each and every story. But it's also emotionally grilling to tell these stories, to listen to the testimonies. Because with every time that I heard the grandmother talking about her pain or about Marah, and every time that I saw the therapist come into Marah's house, an appointment to just help them heal, there couldn't have been a more ridiculous world and word, honestly, as healing during the aftermath. It just seems so far-fetched and so far away, and yet it keeps on happening in ways that we don't expect and don't understand. One of the ways that the Palestinian society and the Palestinian community decided to defy the siege and really just find a better quality of life and make it happen was when they started to dig tunnels. And so this happened in Rafah. Rafah is the last city on the border with the Egyptian authorities. So there's Rafah, Palestinian Rafah, and there's Egyptian Rafah. They are one city split into two, and that's where Sinai Desert start. So Palestinians were fed up and had it with depending on the very little that the Israeli occupation allows to get into Gaza. And they decided that they will seek other ways to bring in not just food supplies, but food supplies, construction materials. We had tunnels that went as big as allowing cars and jeeps to come into Gaza. And of course, that brought millions and millions of dollars to Egypt and to the traders that were working with the tunnel. It was a very dangerous, risky business, however, because the tunnels had always been known to belong to the resistance. But that was the first time that Palestinians tried to resist by bringing aid to their own and bringing what had been banned to their own. And we're talking about very, very limited life pleasures. It goes from one summer, the Israeli occupation just decided to ban pasta, and it remained banned for 3 years. And then another summer, they decided that they are going to ban ice cream. And so we had really unrealistic ban lists that just kept coming. And every time it just seemed to be more and more clear that it was for humiliation purposes. It was not because of any security threat. At the beginning, they started banning the construction materials because I'm sure you heard that term, dual use. So anything of dual use, they would ban. So now at this moment, tents are banned from entering Gaza. The very little tents that entered at the beginning of the genocide are the ones that are already there, but there isn't any more. And we're almost at winter time. So just to witness the cruel regulations that the Israeli army uses as excuses for security and security threats, but it turns out to be nothing of what's mentioned. These tunnels were almost 20 to 30 meters deep. Any tunnels that go deeper than that are very, very risky and not used for trading purposes. So these are the ones that we were allowed into. And this is how it looked from the outside. So for any claim, for any propaganda speech that these tunnels were so hidden and the Israeli occupation didn't know about, that's a complete lie. Because this is literally how it looked from the outside, with a very 2 minutes drone tour around Rafah. You can tell the locations of those tunnels and what they were doing, and you can have the highest definition footage of what is being extracted out of them. It wasn't that big of a story on the news, but it existed on every Western news outlet. So now if you go for AP Images or for Reuters or for Getty Images and search Gaza tunnels, it's going to lead you to coverage that Western media had about the tunnels in 2009, 2010, 2011. The hypocrisy here is that when the story changed and it became about military tunnels, social Western media and mainstream media pretended that they have no idea what the story is. They pretended that they've never heard about the tunnels, even though as Palestinian journalists, we had foreign journalists with us in many of these trips to Rafah to document the tunnels. It was a very blooming business. It was a very big business, and it brought a lot of funds to neighboring countries as well. People brought a lot of food supplies that had been banned. I'm one of the people who took a weekly trip to the tunnels, weekly trip to Rafah to buy formula, baby formula. I had a colic baby, and it was on the banned items from entering Gaza. And so the tunnels provided in so many ways a lifeline. Now, it was a very good opportunity, for the lack of a better word, for exploitation. And a lot of people made a lot of money exploiting Palestinians through this industry as well. It was shut down completely closer to 2014. And that's when Israel launched the 2014 war on Gaza and ended this business. However, it's very important to not just be aware of the warlords that we all know of, how billionaires become billionaires, but also the small collaborators and the small cells of collaborators that operate it for financial benefits and for profit, first and foremost. And I'm sure a lot of you been shocked when Saleh al-Jafarawi, one of our colleagues, had been killed the day after the ceasefire was announced. And it was not by Israeli drones or by Israeli airstrikes, but it was by collaborators who are deeply embedded, who got deeply embedded during the latest year or two. Abu Shabab is one of those groups, and they cemented their ability to exist in Rafah after annihilating Rafah city completely. I'm gonna log out and stop sharing the keynote and open up if anyone has any questions about the photos that we just saw or any questions in general. Tom?
Yes, indeed. So the first one here from Lydia, great photos. Thank you for sharing. How did you get into photojournalism, and are you still working in the profession here?
Yes, I'm still working in the profession here, and I'm still working as a photojournalist and writer. I mean, how can you not, right? Like when you live in Gaza and you witness all of these stories unfolding in front of your eyes, for one, I was this obnoxious kid who knew that I wanted to be a journalist, and I knew that I didn't want to be anything else but a journalist. So I had that kind of covered. I just didn't know what kind of journalist I wanted to be. So I started experimenting in radio, in TV. I worked as a producer, I worked as a reporter, I worked as Arabic and English reporter. And I just knew that this is what I want to do. I wanted to document, and I wanted the world to be able to see Palestinians and Palestine for what it is, rather than just another bloody spot in the universe that they don't want to look at. And that wasn't possible with the number of atrocities that were being committed in Palestine till I was able to dig into the reportage, where I'm able to tell you the story through photos, but at the same time, I'm providing you with the information in writing and combine both. And I think that's how I started, and it took off from there. I still cover heavily about Palestine and Gaza, but I also get embedded in any story that reflects what I learned from my people when it comes to civil rights and human rights and injustices in general.
Absolutely, absolutely. So folks, now is the time. Ask any questions they have about the experience of Palestinians in Gaza, about Eman's career, and about media treatment of the Palestinian cause. Here's the next question, and keep them coming, folks. From Desi. Fodja Eman, welcome Eman. I am always struck by the amount of steel projecting from bombed buildings as seen in photos and videos from Gaza. What do you understand as the incidence of injury, and in particular eye injuries, from this hazard?
The problem is that we build in concrete. So we build, every Palestinian, if you speak to any Palestinian, their biggest dream in life is to build a home for their family, because we've always been threatened by the ethnic cleansing campaign. And so we build with concrete because those are the materials allowed into Gaza back then. So, and there was no reason to not. Like, it's not a place where you have earthquakes or tornadoes. We've been blessed with fairly stable Mother Nature in our neighborhoods. So the problem is that when concrete breaks and when it's struck with explosive, and as I mentioned for Muhammad Khadr, his house wasn't destroyed by an airstrike. It was surrounded by explosives and blown to pieces, which makes the sharpenals and the projectiles coming out of that explosion even as dangerous. A lot of people lost their life and were killed because of the explosion aftermath rather than the actual explosion. If any piece of concrete lands on anyone or near anyone, it can create big catastrophic injury for them. And I've seen that with my own daughter, because my daughter got injured in 2014, and our house wasn't shattered into pieces. So yes, the windows were broken because of the explosion sound and how heavy the bombs that they threw on the neighborhood that night. But it wasn't that. It was the impact and the pressure that generated, my daughter was 1 year old back then, on her tiny body to take. And you can see it in a lot of the Palestinian children, where it's either in the head, and that's just a projectile, or in the eyes, near the eyes, the face, the jawline always gets hit with, like, it's the fragile parts of our body, and how much it can take, and you can never predict that with babies. You can absolutely not. And I'm sure we've seen more than fair share of babies who look perfectly fine, but they get killed through the aftermath again of the airstrike. When it comes to the eyes, I haven't seen anything like the pager attack, for an example, that happened in Lebanon. I haven't seen anything that was directed precisely, but it's to a body part. But we've seen that during the genocide with the snipers, where children always have the shot wound either in the head, in the back, or in the neck, and it's always in the upper body areas. So I mean, I hope that answers the question, but I think the problem isn't what the material that the houses are built from, but how it's being weaponized through the bombings.
Yeah, thank you for that, Eman. There's a couple of questions that are kind of related, so I'm going to try and pull them together a little bit. It says, do you have an opinion about what mainstream media outlets are tuned into the truth, or what mainstream media outlets are tuned into the truth, and what is happening in Gaza? Is there any reason why Gaza does not have a spokesman or two dealing with Western media, apart from doctors and poets? That's one question. There's a related question that asks, where is it? Okay. Have you ever personally experienced direct suppression of your stories and images from any media outlets? And a comment from someone else, very concerning to hear of the Western media not being truthful about what we knew re the tunnels and not reporting truthfully re the attacks by Israel. So I'll let you just comment on those three together.
Okay, I'll try to cover it all to the best of my ability. I think the issue with the tunnels story, and that's why I chose for you to see that, is how it's undeniable. Like, you can literally just go and search, but you just have to know what you're searching for. And you're going to see this story had been covered in any other scope, in any other context. This would be the starting stone of where the story starts. Like, we already covered that. We've already been to Gaza at Reuters, AP, any other agency. And this is what we covered. And now this became the story. Media organizations always brag about their archive. We didn't see that with the tunnels. It was complete silence, as if they didn't even know that there were tunnels in Gaza. And because the story didn't serve the propaganda goals, Israeli propaganda, because it shows how Gaza had been under siege for so long that they had to dig tunnels. And now the resistance used the tunnels again as they used to be used, but even escalated through October 7th. So it's going to get so tangled so fast for them to try to declare deniability. It just wouldn't happen. And I think this is a good example to just bring down the propaganda on its knees, because all the stories that had been in Gaza had been happening for so long. It's just there hadn't been attention or care to move the needle and change the situation. As of suppression, yes, of course. I mean, the problem that I've faced is that I was one of the first women photojournalists. So I was very celebrated by Western agencies, and I was very applauded by them. But at the same time, they often gave me a script that they wanted me to apply to the stories. It's not like they wanted to brainstorm and know what the stories were about and then allow me to cover them or not. And that's what helped me become more into long-term reportage. A lot of those stories, Mohammed Khadr, for an example, was a story that was killed. It was a story that they rejected. And then when I put the story out there as a freelancer, I put it for sale on agencies, and then I applied for organizations to recognize the story for what it is, and it won awards. Then it became published. This is how like backwards the censorship try to oppress so many things, but we don't need always a platform to get there. We can literally just empower those stories by existing. So I've been told before that there is a winery in Gaza, which, I mean, I lived in Gaza. I know Gaza from north to south. There was never a winery in Gaza. Like, we would know if there is one. And I remember the editor was just dismissing me, and he's a foreign journalist, and he kept saying, no, it's just because you're a woman, you don't know. And I had no idea what I wouldn't know about a winery because I'm a woman. But that's just like one of the most ridiculous eh, times where I had just like all of this celebration of me being taboo breaking, and then all of a sudden it's used against me. I think one of the the thing that kept being suppressed was the text with the photos. So my text would be edited, and the narrative would be switched and shifts and twisted, and that contributed into me deciding that I don't want to publish my photos unless they go with my text that I um, documented and reported about it. Did I cover the three questions? I did.
Yes, absolutely. Brian, do you want to?
Absolutely. So from Brona, speaking for every single one of us, I can assure you, not a question, just really want to thank Eman for this beautiful raw insight into life for Palestinians in Gaza. A question though, from Moira, what was the most difficult story to cover?
My daughter.
No doubt.
I don't think that I've ever failed in documenting, but I feel like I did with my daughter. It was something that is so gripping when you're the local journalist, but you're also living what you're reporting. It's one of the most devastating moments of my career, I think, and my life combined together. But I would actually push that to the side and say, if I had to pick another thing, another story, it would be what I'm covering now, the children who are coming out of Gaza without limbs and being sent abroad for rehabilitation and getting prosthetic legs and arms. And I think it's because I know what it means to go through a life altering injury, but at the same time you continue moving while your family are not with you, while your community is not with you abroad. And I felt very confident about covering that story and the project, and I still do. But I think it's very, very hard. It's extremely hard when you meet a child who survived as the only survivor of their family, which is the acronym that Israel created: wounded child, no surviving relatives. And I think I see that again and again, and it's I think it's challenging on so many levels.
Yeah, there's an awful lot of people are just really blown away by your images, and lots and lots of comments just in admiration of the work you do and the way you continue to do that work. And then a very specific question: you mentioned AP and Reuters. Do you believe that their reports on Gaza, Palestine, are censored by Israel? I think maybe an obvious answer to that. Their reports are used heavily here by multiple media organizations in Ireland, including our public broadcaster, RT. So would you like to comment on that?
Yes, they are, and it's by their own admission. We don't need to speculate. We don't need to guess. They said that their offices has to go through a screening or a vetting for every piece of news that they get out, and coming out of Palestine, occupied Palestine, Jerusalem, Gaza, West Bank, all of it. And I believe that that's the downfall of Irish media so far, is that they've been reliant on, even though we have a lot of marvelous Irish journalists, but they've been so reliant on mainstream media narrative, AP, Reuters, the news organizations that we call wires, and it's to them, it's like it's a business. We give you this amount of photos through the month and you only pay us this much. So they are going for the cheaper option in a way than hiring Irish journalists in here in Ireland and relying on them doing the work and documenting and vetting and so on and so forth.
For sure. Interesting question here is about the Rafah crossing. Prior to October the 7th, Israel did not control, this is the question, Israel did not control the crossing at Rafah. How did they enforce restrictions on what could enter Gaza?
They did. They did. They control the most ridiculous lie that we've been hearing for such a long time as Palestinians living in Gaza is that Israel doesn't control what goes in and what goes out because Egypt controls the border with Egypt and with the Egyptian. But no, there's another side of the borders also called Erez, Karim Abu Salim, which is another border with Israel, Krem Shalom. That's the one where we get all the traders get their shippings through. It's the one that is effective now because the one with Rafah through Egypt got completely destroyed. So they 100% controlled everything that goes into Gaza. They definitely influence Egypt as well, because what you're going to see is going to be a battlefield that will start between the Egyptian army and the Israeli army. And what we saw already is Israel killing Egyptian soldiers during the genocide. I believe they were 2 or 3, but the world wasn't that concerned about it because they weren't Israeli soldiers. So the fact that we would sit here and say they weren't controlling Gaza, they were. I wasn't able to leave Gaza to Egypt without an Israeli permission. And that has nothing to do with Israel per se. I also cannot export or import or get any kind of shipping into Gaza or out of Gaza without Israel's permission. So even paper cannot fly through borders.
Absolutely.
A very short question. What news outlet would you recommend for honesty, if any?
The Ditch. I mean,
The
you
Ditch.
have an Irish-made organization. I definitely would recommend. And here's the thing: you can't have one organization always take their word for it. They are trying. The journalists are supposed to vet the information, do the research, and give you the news to the best of their ability. However, sometimes CNN produces pieces that are credible. Sometimes that doesn't mean that they don't have bias when it comes to Palestine. They are criticizing Trump right and left, but they are not able to criticize the Zionist entity. So it just depends on what topic are you watching. If you want any news about Ukraine, CNN are so credible, BBC too. However, I would lean towards journalist versus for-profit media. For-profit media will always do what they do for profit. However, when you follow journalists like Drop Site, that was established by the 2 journalists who previously established The Intercept. The Intercept are still continuing pretty good work and very hardcore investigations. I mean, there's a big ability now to get so many credible journalists to report on certain matters. However, the means and the funds still remain within mainstream media. I follow very closely Al Jazeera, but I don't take every piece that Al Jazeera produces for granted. So I think we need to activate our critical thinking as well.
What's your opinion, question really asked this, what's your opinion of Haaretz as the so-called paper of record, or one of the papers of record in Israel?
That's a perfect example. So the AP reported about Sdeit Iman, which is a concentration camp where Palestinian hostages are getting tortured and raped. And they said it's a shadowy hospital. And then you had Haaretz, an Israeli newspaper, come out and say, no, it's not a shadowy hospital. It's actually a concentration camp where Palestinians are getting raped and tortured and killed. And so that's one example where even the occupation's own media were more, for the lack of a better word, objective than mainstream and Western media. And yes, some of their investigations are credible. Actually, some of the things that we knew about Where's Daddy, the AI system that Israel employs to slaughter Palestinians during the genocide, and the Lavender AI, it was through Israeli journalists. I'm not saying that it's not an occupation journalism. It still will side with the occupier. It will still have their own twisted narrative of what the truth is.
And in terms of international outlets, you mentioned The Intercept. What about, sorry?
And Dropsite.
And the Dropsite, exactly. What about other media outlets like Mondweiss?
Absolutely. I mean, Mondo is very, very geared to reporting in a direction that most Western media is not comfortable going, especially when it comes about Palestine. I think they've done terrific job when it came about keeping track of the violation of this current ceasefire and how many times it had been violated and what was the consequences of each violation. Their staff are magnificent. However, they are not allowed easily in Gaza, and the Palestinian journalists that they worked with in Gaza got assassinated.
Mm-hmm. Brian, over to you again.
Yes, indeed. Just a comment from Moira again. Thank you, Eman. Anyone who saw your photos from your current work in the lighthouse can see the pain. We are blessed to have you here.
Thank you.
So there was a number of questions that were focusing on what people can do to help, you know. Some of our later sessions will focus on exactly what the IPSC's demands and objectives are and what the successes of the solidarity movement in Ireland so far. There was a question there about AI in the context of I'm just trying to find the question here about AI in the context of photojournalism. Would you have anything to say about it?
Yes, I think that people are, there is the effect of smokes and mirrors, right? So yes, there is a lot of AI manipulations that are happening to photos and happening in real time in videos. It's pretty terrifying. However, I don't think it had succeeded whatsoever in distorting the reality that is happening in front of our eyes. So a lot of people will say everything that is coming out of Gaza is AI, which I think is ridiculous. We're still more intelligent than the machine. I think we're coming close to a challenge here, but we're still more intelligent than the machine, and you're still able to break it in pieces and say, yes, this is AI and this is a real photo. Also, we have something that AI can never copy, which is sequence. When we cover a story, there's a photo before, there's a photo after, there's an archive, there are raw images. None of that to get to the level of sophistication to create an entire AI generated archive in that sense for one story, it will take a lifetime. So I think we're still ahead in the game. We're still able to spot when it happens and point it out. And you're going to see, because AI makes things glamorous and perfect. The skin is always perfect. The tears are always perfect. And there's no such thing in reality. The photos are full of flaws, and you can see that easily. So I wouldn't be that concerned about it. I think there is an effect of, oh, look there, oh, look here, it's the AI, it's this, and it's just meant for distraction, not to take it seriously. Of course, it's something that is risky when put in the wrong hands and in the wrong way. However, I'm not too concerned about it, to be honest. And when it comes to action, these are the journalists that you should be following, the ones that are pointing you towards what happened, why it happened, give you all the information, vet it for you, but also make it possible for you to take an action instead of just sitting there with that amount of information. It's very important to be informed. It's so important to know the information and have it for yourself and search it for yourself, but also it's meaningless if it doesn't translate into action. So with every story that we document now, we have an army of NGOs that are assisting us as journalists and helping us to get to the cases that we're working with, and at the same time funding and protecting those NGOs is very, very important. It's very essential. It's the one that brings the children that had their legs cut off to get prosthetic legs, and for us to see them and to witness this atrocity for our own eyes. Not that we need to, but I think it adds credibility to their work as well. So I hope that people, I know it's depleting. We all battle with that feeling, but always there should be an intention behind the story that you're witnessing, you're seeing, you're reading about. And if that intention is not there, you might not be following a good journalist.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Some comments there. What about electronicintifada.net, about Zeteo with Mehdi Hassan? I presume you would consider those really, real, the kind of story, the kind of outlets that you would direct people towards. Another question is coming from a number of different people. How it must be so frustrating to try and get the story out. I mean, we all know that over, I'm not sure what the number is, close to 200 journalists have been murdered, precisely by, specifically by Israel, to kill the story coming out, right? And yet Palestinian journalists like yourself, you continue to, make the stories available, try to get the stories out. How frustrating is it to have to be, to have, blockades and put in front of you by the media outlets that should be, channeling out this news? What's that like?
I think it's disappointing, and it goes into that this industry is dying as we know it. It definitely, Zeteo and Electronic Intifada had been doing great work in covering Palestine and other topics as well, but specifically Palestine, because it's becoming the spot where you can tell if the agency is paid, if it's on the payroll with Zionist propaganda, or is it actually doing the work, or is it having an IDF soldier do it for them. But to be honest, there can't be a coming back for the New York Times, for an example, the Wall Street Journal. There can't be a coming back for them to inform the people after they compromise their integrity that far. It was hard, both because we work in the same field, because some of them are my clients at the beginning of the genocide that I had to cease all relationship with. But it's also mind-boggling, because we keep hearing some people saying, well, Western journalists or foreign journalists are not allowed into Gaza. What did Western journalists or mainstream media, legacy media, do to challenge that? Nothing. Absolutely nothing, other than aimless letters to whom it may concern. If this was committed by Russia, you would have names, titles, and everything dragged into the topic of conversation, and it would be challenged. There would be lawsuits being raised. They would be challenged legally, and they would be challenged in so many other ways, because journalists are not in the business of seeking permission, right? We don't ask for your permission to cover the story of corruption. We just do. I think it's very frustrating, obviously, if you can't tell from my face, but it's something that we've been dealing with as brown journalists, as Arab journalists, and as Palestinian journalists for more than the past 2 years. So it's not that foreign for us, and we didn't just start to handle.
Yeah, absolutely. Like RTE has never, in all of its bulletins, I don't think it's ever stated explicitly, by the way, the Israeli state isn't allowing us into Gaza, so we can't report from there. The Al Jazeera, they will at least say, you know, we can't report from the Israeli state or from the West Bank.
Exactly.
The question I have is, what exactly can people here do? What can people in this call do to tackle media bias, to tackle RTE's bias, for instance, or the papers? How would you approach that?
I admire how informed the Irish people are. The majority that I've met and spoken with, I feel like they understand the gravity of being misinformed, disinformed, and they also understand what that means for Ireland when you have an extension of BBC in Ireland media. When you have an extension of the colonizers and their tongue and their words being weaponized and used to PR laundering for another genocide. I think people need to just vet their sources and vet what they hear. Any news that start with Israel said is not news. That's a statement for the Israeli army and for the occupation. And so when the news is about Gaza, people just ask yourself in any, honestly, it applies to everything and anything in any story. If it's about that story, why is the perpetrator being asked their point of view? We would never ask the Nazis, how did you feel about killing the Jews? We would never bring it in the audacity that is being brought to our screens, our tablets, our access to news in a national and international arena. I think it's just like the AI. It's not actually as complicated as the AI, because the sophistication in being a mouthpiece for the Israeli army is not that high. It's embarrassingly low. Once you read the title, Israel says 5 Palestinian journalists got killed. Who did it then? Then why are we asking the person who's being charged with murder if they feel like that was a murder? It doesn't make any sense, I don't think. And I appreciate how vigilant the Irish people had been. And honestly, across Europe, we're seeing this movement to not allowing agencies to get away with anything. They are supposed to be crucifying and really vetting everything that the politicians say. And instead, they are rubbing shoulders with them and going to cocktail parties and poisoning the ability to have credible news. But more so, what does that mean to anything that is covered in Gaza, in Ireland? What does that mean about the housing crisis that is happening? What does that mean about the illusion that is being made that the refugees and the immigrants in Ireland are the reason of having billionaires becoming more filthy rich? So like it don't always apply it to the Palestinians, because honestly, it's closer to us than we know. This genocide happened in Gaza and it radiated across the globe.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many things that they never really explored around, for instance, the water charges, if you go back 10 years, the Rossport campaign and so forth. A question that I would have again is, for people, and there are lots of people out there, you know, people are in various social media bubbles these days, and then there are people who are still regard mainstream media as credible. But what would you say to people out there who actually think that the Irish government are playing a good game on Palestine? Because there are people out there who think that, because they're not being given the information. What would you say about that, and how do you reach those people?
I think the Irish government owes a lot of explanation for the people the moment they started allowing American weapons to fly over Shannon, a civilian airport, and fund the genocide with weapons. So there's no neutrality that had been honored during this genocide that wasn't broken by the Irish government first. And there, not only just neutrality on media side, but just literally the laws of neutrality for Ireland. And what the people should be demanding is not just answers, it should be resignations, to be honest. And we're at that stage where they are bringing the name of Irish liberation into a place that it's getting challenged to aid and abet another genocide, and that should be unacceptable for every free person with humanity. But also, to stop a genocide, it's not about political statements, it's about the action. And the Irish government took no action that they should have took. Even the occupied territories bill, it came how many years late, and it helps them abide by the international law. So they are doing us no favors here. In addition to all of these violations, if we don't have accountability, something that I hope that any Irish person would identify and resonate with, the British were able to commit genocide in Ireland, and it went unchecked, and there was no repercussions for them, and there was no reparations. And if anyone would doubt that, just see how Soldier F just walked last month. And to say that we need a politician to speak in the tongue that we like, then that's neither here nor there. We need actions, and if they are not capable of taking action through the international laws and the Irish laws that are already out there for them, maybe they should be unseated.
Absolutely.
Yeah. There's a statement and a question. The statement says there's a program on later on this evening on ITV1 at 10:45 called Breaking Ranks Inside Israel's War, and with some Israeli soldiers who, well, basically it's an insight into that. So it may be worth watching. Also, a question: how can we keep in touch with your platform, with your work, Eman?
I have my website. I also have my Substack, which you can join free of charge. And that's where I post the material that I just don't trust specific agencies with. But it's also the place where I keep my work coming on weekly basis, on whether it's stories or it's just the documentation of genocide from my place as a Palestinian journalist in exile. And if you want to see more of the photography, you can go to the emanmohammed.com and see as many as there are uploaded out there. And if I can help or assist with anything, just contact me through the website.
Okay, great. And we'll continue to promote your work and obviously to keep in touch. So you've been very generous with your time. We're now 25 minutes over time, but I think, and we have many questions we never got around to. So apologies for that, and thank you for your questions. It's been a really memorable evening and a very special evening. It will be up on our YouTube channel on IPSC in a week or two. So we'll try to get them up there as quickly as we can. So again, thank you, Eman, thank you, Brian, and thank you everyone who participated tonight. We had over 100 people involved, and it's been excellent. So we will keep in touch. I just want to mention that this is the second one of a 5-part series, and next week we have John Reynolds, Professor John Reynolds from Maynooth University. John is he's an amazing individual. He's a scholar. He is an expert in international law. He has supported the genocide case on the ICJ and many other cases. And he is absolutely amazing in terms of his knowledge, his expertise, his commitment. And I would encourage you to tune in again next week and in further weeks. So I'm going to close it there. Again, thank you to everyone. And, we'll see you again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for everyone.